In the session on building character through defining moments, we looked at the idea that grand principles may have limited value in decision-making. At face value, they may not provide enough specific guidance to help us make context-specific decisions. Yet these grand principles, or as I call them in this session, ultimate values, actually are very helpful. They predispose us to think in honorable ways. Alexander Hill, in his book, Just Business, presents an ethical framework for Christian business people, an approach that appeals to ultimate values as our primary guide for making wise, ethical decisions. According to Hill, many ethical approaches fall short. Christian ethics is not egoism. Egoism would say, I'm doing this because it feels right. It's the path of least resistance. Neither is Christian ethics utilitarian in nature. Utilitarianism asks, how will this action protect or help the whole? We also cannot limit Christian ethics to deontological reasoning, an approach that posits which rules apply in a given situation or which rules carry more weight. According to Hill, these ethical approaches fall short individually and collectively. They don't address character, the wellspring from which many of our decisions flow. So there must be a better way, right? According to Hill, we can find no better example for our character development than God himself. The foundation of Christian ethics is the changeless character of God. Ephesians 5:1-2 in the New Living Translation says, "Follow God's example in everything you do, because you are his dear children. Live a life filled with love for others, following the example of Christ, who loved you and gave himself as a sacrifice to take away your sins. And God was pleased because that sacrifice was like sweet perfume to him." It's hard to go wrong when we're following God's example. Obviously, there's a lot of room for interpretation as how we emulate God's character and what that looks like in particular situations. But it all starts with a desire to at least make the attempt. The assumption is that as we orient our character to increasingly reflect God's character, we will be predisposed to make wise decisions that are pleasing to God. Hill's ethical framework, with its heavy emphasis on character and associated virtues, falls into the category of virtue theories that we explored in the Understanding the Field of Ethics session. Hill maintains that the core elements of Christian ethics are three character qualities: holiness, love, and justice. According to Hill, everything about God's character and what he expects of us tends to come under these ultimate values. We must keep all three characteristics in balance, like a three-legged stool. Yet what is required to know how long each stool leg should be? In other words, how do we know how much holiness, justice, and love to administer in a given situation? I'd suggest that we need wisdom to make those kinds of decisions. Wisdom is kind of like the seat of the stool that determines the appropriate amount of holiness, love, and justice required in a particular situation. In my view, it's a necessary complement to Hill's three ultimate values. Hill also uses the analogy of a human body to describe how holiness, justice, and love work together. Holiness is like the skeleton that provides core strength. Justice is like muscles that ensure balance, while love typifies flesh that emanates warmth. Yet even with these three parts of the human body, there needs to be something that controls the coordination of everything: the brain. For the body to function in a healthy fashion, it needs to take its instructions from the brain. In the same way, our application of holiness, justice, and love to make wise ethical decisions needs to be subservient to God and his leading. This is where the fear of the Lord comes in again. He will give us wisdom to discern how to rightly apply holiness, justice, and love in our decisions. He'll also give us strength and discipline to make those decisions, implement them, and then live with the consequences. Hill defines holiness as single-minded devotion to God and absolute ethical purity. The primary elements of holiness include a zeal for God, making God our top priority, purity, an aversion to and separation from impure communication, sexuality, and purpose. The third is accountability, a recognition that all actions have consequences. We reap what we sow. And 4, humility, an appropriate response when we recognize who we are in the presence of God, like Isaiah's response in Isaiah 6. Woe to me, I'm ruined, I'm a man of unclean lips. Hill also explains some of the potential dangers of pursuing holiness. There's legalism, which tends to reduce holiness to bookkeeping. There's judgmentalism, pointing out the faults in others, and there's also withdrawal from society, an inappropriate distancing from so-called impure people. About justice, Hill says that it provides order to human relationships by laying out reciprocal sets of rights and duties for those living in the context of community. According to Hill, the basic aspects of justice include 4 elements. The first one is procedural rights, which emphasizes fair processes in decision-making and equal protection for everyone. The second element is substantive rights, referring to universal or societal rights. Then we have merit, which permits disparity as long as procedural and substantive rights are honored. And finally, justice also involves a contractual element, which involves not harming others, respecting procedural justice, and honoring our contracts. Of course, justice by itself tends to be cold and dispassionate, leading to harsh results and sometimes condemnation. Love is needed to balance justice. So let's talk about love. As the third ultimate value in Hill's ethical framework, love emphasizes, you guessed it, relationships. It's empathetic. There's a willingness to journey closely with others. Love is merciful. Those who love go beyond the loving feeling and act on behalf of others. Love also involves a sacrifice of one's rights, those same rights secured by justice. Of course, as with the other ultimate values, there are potential abuses. We can have a narrow focus. Sometimes the loving thing may not be the right thing or may need to be tempered by one of the other ultimate values. It's also important to recognize that with only love as a guide, it's sometimes difficult to determine the action that is the most loving. An excessive or unbalanced emphasis on love can lead us to wrongly assume that love requires passive acceptance of everything. In the process, we become doormats. Even though appealing to ultimate values may not give us specific guidance in a particular situation, embracing and embodying them will orient our thoughts and our actions to the character of God and what He desires for us. As we assume this kind of heart posture, we'll be in a much better position to see which options are right and best.